Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Please take a seat. Tonight, you're not sitting in your rooms listening to a man rave about a fictional universe that died years ago. No, you're sitting in a theatre in Altdorf, about to see a play based on the life of a goblin. The strongest night goblin of them all, in fact, one Skarsnik, Lord of Eight Peaks. Indeed, the wondrous playwright behind tonight's event, one Jeremiah von Bickenstadt, is the one person who Skarsnik entrusted to tell his life story, even though it was slightly against the former's will. Either way, it is Bickenstadt who we have to thank for the story of Skarsnik, the true king of Eight Peaks, and you can try and fight me on that, but you won't win. Skarsnik is the leader of the Crooked Moon tribe, the strongest night goblin warband in the World's Edge Mountains, and the proud father of the massive squig, Gobbler. Before he was any of that though, Skarsnik was spawned like any other goblin in the world of Warhammer. Both orcs and goblins don't have mummies and daddies in Warhammer, you see. Instead, they just come into the world, mean and green. Skarsnik was no different, and he clawed his way out of the dirt into a mushroom-lit cave. Skarsnik and his goblin brethren roamed the lands of the Backstairs Boys, not to be confused with that band, a small tribe that was a branch of the larger Crooked Moon Greenskins. Even when he was birthed from the earth, Skarsnik showed the first hints of greatness he would later be defined by, as he was able to speak his first words moments after coming to life. He commanded all those who spawned alongside him to leave the dangers of the cave they'd found themselves in. He couldn't get them out of being pressed into service by the Backstairs Boys though, and he and his brethren were quickly made slaves of the tribe, given the task of harvesting mushrooms. Doesn't sound like that bad of a life really, when you consider the other careers Warhammer has. Skarsnik wasn't given his great name at this point in life, and he didn't earn it until much, much later. For now, he was just known as Runt because he was smaller than most of his brothers. This didn't stop Skarsnik from rising through the ranks of his tribe though, and before long he was given his own little warband of gobbos to control. He used this position of power to gain favour with the tribal leaders, as well as gain an ally in a former Skaven captive of the Backstairs Boys, making secret trading deals between the Ratman and himself, which benefited both the tribe and our hero. During his time near the top, Skarsnik proved to be a gobbo of influence. He once stopped runt boy Snotrook from torturing a young cave squig, for example. Skarsnik wasn't known to be a kindly goblin, but it seems he does draw the line at animal abuse. However, this move may not have been to Skarsnik's best advantage, as Snotrook then became an enemy of our green hero and let the Backstairs Boys chief know about the Skaven deals. Skarsnik could have ended up executed, but instead found himself as a slave once more to a band of goblin wolf riders. Even though he was locked in captivity by the fat wolf rider leader, Griff Makiki the Cunning, Skarsnik plotted his escape, first catching the eye of his new boss by proving he could speak both the languages of the humans and the dwarves. He did this by insulting a dwarf by saying his mother had, well, let's say explicit relations with a pony, to which the dwarf responded by brawling with Skarsnik. Once let out of his cage, Skarsnik again rose through the ranks of his new wolf pack, earning the respect of Griff and removing rivals throughout the tribe. However, as Skarsnik had wished to return to the mountains of the Eight Peaks and his new boss did not, he was forced to slit Griff's throat, earning him the position at the head of the Wolf Rider tribe as he journeyed back home. With a sizable army, Skarsnik made his way to Carrick Eight Peaks unharmed. Not only that, but he picked up some new allies on the way, subjugating other goblin tribes and even some orc warbands too. Although, when he finally returned to Carrick Eight Peaks, Skarsnik didn't find its gates open as the old dwarf hold no longer had greenskin occupants. Instead, the Skaven now ruled the Eight Peaks, after taking the upper reaches of the region in a lightning-fast invasion. The Crooked Moon still held a good portion of the Eight Peaks though, and so Skarsnik snuck into the hold under the cover of night to see if he could meet with the big boss. Returning to the domain of the Backstairs Boys, Skarsnik found a horrid surprise as we now see the return of Snotrook. Runt Boy no longer, he is the big boss of the Backstairs Boys now, and he still holds resentment for Skarsnik. Skarsnik was thrown into a fighting pit with the most vicious cave squig Snotrook could find. It was a giant beast many times bigger than a goblin, and it charged right for Skarsnik. In this moment, it seemed the tale of our hero was at its end, but just before it brought its mighty mouth down on Skarsnik, the squig stopped cold in its tracks and sniffed the goblin with a surprising interest. It turns out that not too long ago, the runt squig that Skarsnik had saved from abuse had grown up to be this monster. The two quickly paired up, and the squig, now known as Gobbler, tore through the Backstairs Boys and was aided by the rest of Skarsnik's wolf riders, who had arrived just in the nick of time. Skarsnik even fed his old rival Snotrook to Gobbler, solidifying the two's friendship. After the dust had settled, Skarsnik grew to realise how bad things were looking for the Crooked Moons. The tribe had been split in two by the Skaven invasion, and its leadership was now nowhere to be found. However, with this disarray, Skarsnik saw an opportunity to not only win himself the 8 Peaks, but to also name himself as the new ruler of the Crooked Moons. Many of the disarrayed orcs and goblins immediately bent the knee to our hero, but he now had to earn their loyalty, and so Skarsnik planned a counterattack against the Skaven forces. It was a great plot indeed, far beyond the mind of most of his greenskin subordinates, and so a few had to be beaten until they understood what he was going for. Skarsnik tricked the Skaven army multiple times with false retreats which led into counterstrikes, and he also made it look like things weren't going well within his own camp, which led the Skaven into a false sense of security. Before the final battle for Carrick 8 Peaks began, Skarsnik earned another victory over the Skaven by luring the High Chieftain of Clan Moors into an ambush that saw the total destruction of the Ratmen's military leadership, leaving them open to the final assault at the Hall of 1,000 Pillars. Skarsnik surrounded the Skaven fort in the hall, cracking it open with stolen powder kegs the dwarves had left long ago. The Ratmen's tunnels were also sealed off, leaving them no point of retreat. Even as victory seemed assured, a new line of Skaven infantry came pouring through the northeast, ready to relieve their brethren. Skarsnik's men had faith in his plan though, and they did not waver. It was at this moment that the goblins who had taken control of the eastern gate let the wolf riders pour into the hall, flanking the relief forces of the Skaven and ensuring a green victory. Once the last of the rats were dead, a great chant began around the goblin who had led the greenskins to victory. They raised him up, and an orc shaman granted the goblin formerly known as Runtgit his true name, Skarsnik. For you see, he had only earned his great title at this point, and from this day onward, he rid the 8 Peaks of their Skaven infestation and ruled the Dwarven Hold, happily ever after. This is where our play ends, and so does the backstory of Skarsnik, but it's not actually where the green mean plotting machine is left in terms of the lore. Indeed, even as the curtains close on Bickenstadt's play, there's still plenty of story left to tell, which brings us to our dear old friend the End Times, where Skarsnik has a significant role to play in the 4th book. Skarsnik is ousted from the 8 Peaks by Belengar Ironhammer, a stinky dwarf who believes that he is the one who has the rights to the hold. However, Skarsnik is making grand plots to return himself to the rightful seat, and for most of Warhammer's lore, he's actually fighting to win it back by keeping the dwarves hemmed in. By the End Times, we're looking at a love triangle situation, where Belengar, Skarsnik and Queek Headtaker of Clan Moors are all vying for the seat of the 8 Peaks. Belengar got the shortest end of the stick here, as his dwarves just didn't have the numbers to hold out against the hordes of Skaven and Greenskins, especially after the former got a power boost for their End Times role. Skarsnik, for all his plots and schemes, couldn't manage to face the overwhelming forces of the Skaven either. In a battle where Skarsnik managed to ambush Queek Headtaker's armies, he brought his own forces down like 2 sets of teeth, crushing the rats in between. However, from the nearby hills, more and more rats poured out of the 8 Peaks, surrounding our hero. The worst loss came of all when Skarsnik's best friend Gobbler was killed by a Skaven Packmaster, who was swallowed up by the squig but not killed outright by his stomach acids. Following the death of his companion, Skarsnik gave up the fight against the rats. He took a deal which would allow him Zufbar and safe passage to it, but he had to give up his claim to the 8 Peaks. Skarsnik didn't just keel over though, and he had one last great scheme before he left the setting of Warhammer. As he and his army were leaving the World's Edge Mountains, heading for Zufbar, a great explosion echoed behind them, levelling much of the 8 Peaks. Skarsnik smiled a bit, as he had been the one to set up the detonation, leaving the Skaven with one final present from the greatest goblin who ever lived. Skarsnik doesn't really get that big of a role in the final battle for the old world, sadly. He doesn't get to do anything, to be honest, nor does he enter the Age of Sigmar, which if you ask me is all a crying shame. Without Gobbler he's a bit neutered, yes, but even though I love the pair of Skarsnik and his best bro Cave Squig, the fact that Games Workshop didn't have anything for him is just a bit silly. There were rumours he'd be the avatar of Mork as Grimgor was the avatar of Gork in the End Times, but that never happened. All memes aside of him just being a tricksy little goblin, Skarsnik is by far one of the most interesting greenskins we've ever seen in the setting. He thinks. I mean, he really, properly thinks about things, which makes him a one-of-a-kind greenskin character on its own, but he also just has this distinct personality that sets him apart and makes me like him much more than most of the orcs in the setting. I'll miss him in the mortal realms, and I hope if you've got this far, you will too. Thank you for watching, As always, if you've got anyone else you'd like me to tell the story of, please do let me know. Until then, mourn Gobbler, my friends, and never forget who the true king of the Eight Peaks is.